Right, hi everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to the second instalment of the Fruition IT Transatlantic webinar. Obviously discussing and going into further depth from the last conversation we had for artificial intelligence and the implications on cybersecurity. Very positive feedback from the last webinar, so keen to sort of deep dive further with our esteemed panel with regards to the pros and cons of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. For those that are new to this, I'm Damien, and this is my colleague Marcus. We're principal consultants for the cyber and information security practice here at Fruition IT. Fruition, we're a global tech recruitment specialist, and we're keen to get everyone's thoughts. This is going to be an open discussion for everybody. Obviously, we're going to have minimal impact on this discussion and allow our panelists to openly answer questions that come in from the audience. Just brief introductions for the people that are attending. If we could just get our panel just briefly introduce themselves, and then we can get the conversation started. So, Mel, if you'd like to start us off, if that's okay.
Great. I'm Dr. Melanie Garson. I'm the Cyber Policy Lead at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and I'm also an Associate Professor at UCL, University College London, where I look at the future of conflict in the digital age.
Fantastic. And Glenn?
Yeah, so welcome back, everybody. I'm Glenn. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Virginia's Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. Been with the agency for about 3 years. Prior to that, spent some time in the financial sector. And before that, about 24 years in the Air Force doing IT and cybersecurity, cyber defense stuff. So very happy to be back and be here today.
Thank you, Glenn. And Angus?
My name is Angus Chen. I'm a cybersecurity professional. I have created contents for the world's largest cybersecurity professional organization on the topic of talents. I spoke at the world's largest cybersecurity conference early this year, and next month, I'm going to be at the world's largest hackers conference as the SOC team. And I'm also one of the chapter authors for the book on the topic of digital twins. So education is the big piece in my mind, and that's my focus.
Fantastic, and I think that's a great starting point, Angus. From the feedback we received from the first webinar, we had lots of different questions coming in, people wanting to deep dive into various topics. So we'll leave the floor to you, but yeah, I think AI in education and sort of evolving that piece would be a great starter, if that's okay with you. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, so real quick, Angus, you bring up about the education piece, and I think that's a very key thing we need to really talk about around AI, right? And not just the education of how to use it, but what are our educators going to be using AI for, and what are the students, how they're going to embrace that. And I recently sat on a conference panel with the Commonwealth's CIO, and we discussed this at great length with a bunch of educators for K through 12 and then the higher education. And one of the things that we really started deep diving into is the use of AI in education and how's that going to affect things. And I had this very poignant conversation with my sister, who is a high school math teacher. And her thought through this is going to somewhat revolutionize or change the way we consider what is intelligence or smart, or someone who's smart. Because right now, as they educate the children, it's, hey, memorize this, regurgitate it. Did you retain it? Yes. Okay, you passed the course or whatnot. And with the readily availability of information, especially with Chat GPT and other open type generative AI solutions, I think we have to redefine what education really means, and that we need to start focusing more on the critical thinking skills and how we interpret the information that comes back to us. And what I mean by that is, whenever you ask generative AI, for example, a question and it gives you an answer back, approach it from a standpoint of, okay, this AI is very eager to please me. It's going to give me an answer, right or wrong. It's going to give me an answer. It's going to be very confident in what that answer is. but use the critical thinking skills to dissect what's given back. Is it true? Is it relevant to what I'm looking for? Is there any adjustment that I need to make to ensure that the information that I'm going to use from it is one applicable to my problem, and two, is it trustworthy? As we went through a little bit further with that in discussion with some of the educators, it was very clear that the newer model of ChatGPT, for example, was giving back some false information. And we kind of dissected that. Why is that? Is it because the model is broken? Is it because there may be some misinformation is being fed into the model to cause it to give bad information or whatnot? So that just goes back to reinforce whatever we look at that's given to us from AI, we have to be able to, one, understand what it's given to us, and then ensure that we can trust that answer. And I think the critical thinking skills is what's going to be critical with that. So
I want to jump in on a couple of points on that, because I think there's two questions. I think there's one about using sort of ChatGPT and overly available large language models, and the question of like AI sort of co-pilots, teaching pilots, personalized education that can exist, that can be hugely valuable. So at the interview, we had a big Future Britain conference, and we had people from Khan Academy and CenturyTech that really showed how you can use sort of AI enablement to really personalize kids' education. And in the programs they showed, it's not like the kids just say, if it asks, write me the essay, it won't do that for them. It will sort of take them through the questions of, or even if it's a maths problem, say, tell me the solution, it won't. It'll take through like, how do you start? How do you get to what bit do you think you could do? So I think there's one element of how do we get to that bit and really elevate using AI tools as enhancing human intelligence. I think the question, though, of the reliance within sort of how do we use ChatGPT and the questions, I think there's a real problem in the political discussion of this, because I was in sitting in Tech UK, and a politician suddenly says, and it's the way politics is always way behind. So they jumped on it and said, I hear that there's going to be a new profession called prompt engineers. I'm going to go to universities and ask them, are you training prompt engineers? I was like, so missed the point. I literally wanted to like run on the stage and scream and shout at this person, like missing the point, because it's exactly about this. It's not about, are we trained prompt engineers? And already the conversation is so far ahead of how you use it. I got a 13-year-old daughter. She recently comes to me, she goes, Mommy, like in her exam week, have you heard about ChatGPT? I was like, yeah, don't talk about ChatGPT in exam week. I was like, she was like, no. And second of all, do you actually know what I do for a job? Because you've even asked me that question. And then she was like, no. So I know I can't use it for an essay. I know I can't do that, but like, so I went to ChatGPT. I asked it to generate every single exam question that could possibly exist for me on this topic. I've spent the evening like practicing all the answers. Like, now can I go watch TV? And I was like, so I think it's really, there is that skill where we find that power of like AI for human intelligence and where we do, but it's not for everybody. Is it going to be a natural skill?
We've got a question that's come in, guys, just to sort of pose this to you. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but someone's mentioned that they're not particularly worried about the use of AI in properly regulated liberal democracies, but they are worried about how we protect ourselves from its misuse by malevolent entities in rogue jurisdictions. Any ideas on that? So, yeah, I mean, what's your thoughts on that? That's quite an interesting question, really, to expand on. If that's okay.
Yeah, a great question, Troy. So a couple of weeks ago, Biden administrations invited 7 AI companies, that's including FANGs, to White House to talk about this topic, transparency, AI transparency, as well as safety and so forth. One of the things that could consider is to use this FATE framework to address this transparency. So FATE stands for fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics. That's just focused on transparency. One example is, we all know the high school dropout rates again, education, related with crime activities. If the kids are not in school, they do something bad. So the general consensus and solutions will be let's hire better teachers. Let's identify better teachers. So all of a sudden you have a lot of educators and the school system on the administration side. They use computing system or so-called the AI/ML system to evaluate the teacher. As a result, a teacher named Sarah Wasowski actually is it's a real story on New York Times, I believe. At the middle schools was fired, and so people follow up and ask why this teacher's being fired. The explanation is the decision was made based on the computing system result. So I mean, Troy, you pointed out this is very important in terms of transparency in our education system, and we and people are addressing this issue as we discussed.
Yeah, Angus, if I can, I'm going to tag on to that just real quick. So there was a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights that was recently published here in the United States. And part of that is it's based on 5 principles. And one of the principles is the consideration of alternatives or the human fallback, right? So as we look at what the machines are telling us, it's very important that we have that human on the loop or in the loop to evaluate that information to make a human decision, not just relying on the machine decision, right? So I think that's very important to keep in mind. I want to shift over. Roger had put a very distinct question in, and this is what Damien had touched on about the misuse by malevolent entities or rogue jurisdictions. And I think this is a great topic, right? As we start talking more about what we want to do as societies and have regulation and controls and laws. And I know the EU's got some things that they're working towards. I know the UK is working towards some things too. The US, I believe that we're a bit behind. And I think that's kind of intentional, being that we're going to let things settle a little bit, see where things play out, and then we're going to kind of get involved a little bit further down the road. But, how do we keep that from happening? I'm going to say that I don't think we can. I don't think we can stop that, other than knowing what to look for as far as attack vectors or what possible malevolent entities are going to be using against us. I know I've talked with many AI vendors, and I know this was a topic that came out in the news, I think on the 21st of July, that major tech leaders had met at the White House and had pledged that they would find a way to watermark AI, right? In a way that when something is generated by AI, we can definitively say this was artificial, this was not done by a human being. In this case, what I'm really referring to is like misinformation, the types of things we see a lot of times in social media. If we can tag that in a way that we can definitively say, yes, this is AI. This hits home to me very, very closely because my oldest son is 15, and he and I have discussions all the time about technology and how to use it for good and how it could be used for bad against us. And one of the things that he asked as I was actually driving to school last year was, how is it that we're going to distinguish between information that is human generated and AI generated in the future? And so we talked through that a bit, and he's very attuned to geopolitical happenings across the world. And his main concern is misinformation, especially around the Ukrainian war and what we're getting out of that, right? And great point. And I'm glad he's thinking about these things. But I'm also very thankful that the government leaders are starting to think about these. So I think to answer the point about the misuse of AI against us, we have to find a way how the AI technology leaders are going to be able to watermark that in a way that we can fully understand where that information comes from.
Yeah, but it's just to jump on that, Glenn, because it's really tricky in the sense that we're looking at it, first of all, from an English language perspective. And actually, there's been some really interesting experiments done with sort of asking sort of ChatGPT both in Russian and Ukrainian for different perspectives and the completely different answers that it's getting to the gen. Now, the interesting thing with ChatGPT when this experiment was done was that actually, because it cuts off at 2022, all the answers didn't even come into the Russian invasion of Ukraine yet. So we're also sort of looking at where that is sitting behind. I think we've always got with that English language perspective. ChatGPT's only just been rolled out into a number of other languages. It does a whole load of weird stuff once you begin to look into how it's working with information across other languages. And then also finding that particular space of what, yes, you've got manipulation of information, but you've also got differing accounts and differing perspectives that are genuine personal perspectives of a situation, and how that will be flagged up. So whether, you know, it's one man's freedom fighters, another man's terrorists, and what sort of where that's looked at with the information, it's going to be an incredible challenge to and sometimes it's not just, you know, misused by malevolent entities, but it can be just people's belief systems, but where that then gets reinforced into the data, misused within the training data. And we've talked about this, I think, before, where we get bias and racism within the machine, not necessarily because of malevolence, but just because of people's belief systems.
Yeah, I think it's. I think we discussed this last week when we all got together around the various isms and the biasnesses that can be put into. So obviously the various different AI bots, and I know that's something that that you were more than happy to discuss on what can happen there. But no, I mean, obviously just some other things that obviously, I suppose, off the back of education and related to cybersecurity, a few things that we'd heard and people wanted to discuss was how AI can be used to improve sort of the training side for companies to use with education training tools. You know, how they can use it to train against hacking or just in general to aid companies. What's your sort of thought process around that, if that's possible?
Yeah, Damien, I missed you, that you broke up just a little bit. Could you?
Yeah, sorry, Glenn. So what I was saying is that a few people had mentioned from last time around AI and how that can be used internally in companies for education and training purposes, allowing them to train against, you know, cyber hacks or general technology, all related to sort of cybersecurity. What's sort of your take on that piece?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a very good point, right? And I have not used it yet in my organization in that aspect, but I've talked to other CISOs that have, and what I found very interesting is that they're using their analysts to take snippets of code and have it put into ChatGPT, and basically I said, what does this code do? And have it dissect that, and that kind of speeds up the triage of different things they're seeing in their SOCs and whatnot. So I think it's a tool, right? It's going to enable the speedy delivery of the services that we're looking for from a cybersecurity standpoint. And again, whatever is given to us, we have to be very cautious of that and use critical thinking skills. And I talked about this maybe last time on the webinar, but I know I've talked about it in other panel discussions, is that the third generation are the ones I'm most concerned about. And when I say that, us users now, we have years of experience and expertise that whenever we receive an answer back from the AI, we know to question that. You know, we rely on our experiences and our critical thinking skills to say, is this right? If it's not, you know, what is it that do we need to ask another question to clarify or whatnot? And the second generation that are the analysts below us, we can bring them along, right? And we say, okay, based on this result, this is how you can really break down the answer. Is it true? Is it not? How do we use this towards our cybersecurity posture? That third generation that's going to come after them. These are the individuals that will grow up with this technology, will be very trusting in the technology, much so like my children today with the technology they use. You know, if they want to go somewhere, they put it in maps and off they go. They don't look at the map and say, is it really taking me the right way? I don't know. I just know I want to go and get a burger, and this is taking me to the burger place, right? I think that's what we'll see generations that come as the technology evolves, it matures. There's going to be a level of trust. Right. There was a comment in the question from David around, you know, how mobile phones are making us less smart. Is that what's going to happen with AI as well? Going back to the story I was telling about my sister being the math teacher, I asked her that same question, right? And she's like, no, I don't think it's going to make us less smart. What it is that it's going to be a tool set for us to use for education. And she said, let's go way back, the abacus, and then the advent of the modern day calculator. They didn't make us less smart. We have a tool set to help speed along the process of our mathematics. Well, I think the AI piece, especially with the Chat GPT and other type of LLMs, is that it's going to give us greater access to information quicker for us to make decisions and speed along our services and our deliveries of whatever our products are that we're putting out in the market.
Yeah, I agree with Glenn. Following what he said about the different generations of analysts, but I'm seeing two different chats. There's a webinar chat and a Q&A, and I'll try to answer what Dave's comment. Earlier generation of analysts does not require much of coding. It's not part of their responsibility. As the adoption of infrastructure as code, codings become important to be able to tune the system or the security posture of the system. As the analysts move to newer generations of analysts coming in, they know how to use tools similar to Copilot to help them to write the code or generate the code with little times and minor modifications. In an organization, there's also, because certain privacy regulations or business objective, companies start to consider or adopting synthetic data without violating privacy and so forth. And that synthetic data is produced by using AI algorithm. So for example, again, Audacity, autoencoders and so forth. And I'm also seeing the site that being used using AI as friends in those cases.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on some of the questions, because I think it's some really interesting ones. But I think going back to, and I think it's really fascinating, these questions about transparency and how much we want to know. And when we talk about glass boxes versus, black boxes, and the things that, everybody takes for granted how their electricity gets for their light bulb. And it's this question about how does the car work, and like, how much of that do we need to know to make sure that our light bulb, we need to know enough about handling that so it doesn't electrocute us, but it doesn't. So where do we think about, do people really care as long as they get electricity? And is that, it always reminds me of that great quote from Douglas Adams in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it talks about like anything that's there when you're born is normal, and then ordinary. If you're between 15 to 35, it's new and exciting, and if you're over 35, it's against the natural order of things. And how do we absorb that? And is that sort of a lot of our feelings, to go to where young people are going to go in with how, yeah, it's absolutely right, they're going to take it for granted. They're really not going to care as long as it comes out. And like, do our kids really care how Instagram works, providing when they open it, they could do what they want? And that is part of the problem about it. So it's creating those safeties and creating the transparency. And I think this is with this real tension about the training data and IP. And one of the cyber threats, if we want the cyber security threats we're facing at the moment, is partly driven by, or if you want, stupidity by people putting in contracts and whatnot into ChatGPT. I think we might have discussed it last year. It's like, oh, write me a contract for this without any sense. And I've even had, people on my team that suddenly put in that still something unpublished through to ChatGPT and say, like, try and get ChatGPT to improve it. I'm like, why would you do that? Like, because they don't, it's new and exciting. They're between 15 and 35. It's new and exciting. Don't really think about it. But so I think that balancing that tension of transparency and IP And it goes back to these bigger questions of where do we view how we use it, and how do we train people that we work with to recognize what is inherently proprietary. And I don't know whether that's going to be, we're really going to have to 15-35 age group to train them. It's not that new and exciting, you know, whether there are things like we have to say, do not put through ChatGPT, and whether we have to sort of actively mark things at this train stage to reteach people, because it's not something that our average employees think about.
Absolutely, I agree with Melanie has a very good point in terms of what we need to know. Since we're talking about AI and cybersecurity, so I'm just going to touch on the cybersecurity side. In the United States, SEC recently put out a proposal that when there's a cyber incident, is required to report within 4 days. So that's something as a CISO or board of directors that they need to know. They need to have that type of knowledge in terms of what's the updated rule proposals and regulation. And as a CISO, if you do not have the AI knowledge, then you would need to identify people to help you to get the things done. And how are you going to find those talents? And you could go post Catch the Flag. You could go back to your alma maters to recruit the talents that where you're familiar with. You could go to speed networking, hackathons. There are many ways to go find those talents. As analysts who is interested in cybersecurity area, I recently spoke to a headhunter, just get a feeling of the market. He mentioned 3 tools: Python, Perl, and Java. So those are the 3 things you could consider depending on your levels.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in. Angus brought some really good points, and Melanie brought some great points. So I want to kind of touch on all these, and hopefully I can get through it in a nice orderly way. And Randolph posted some things in the chat. So I'm gonna start where Randolph asked about, students using ChatGPT to generate thesis papers and whatnot. At the end of the school year last year, my son came home and he was really upset. And what it was is that he had to write a 3-page essay for his English class. Well, okay, that's finals. That's what that is, son. And he's like, no, you don't understand. One of the students in a prior class before me got caught using ChatGPT to generate the paper. And because of that, when they went in to sit down to do their final, they took all the laptops away, gave them paper and pencil, and said, guess what? You're writing a 3-page essay. And he said, we had to do it by hand. And see the people that are laughing, you're like, okay, yeah, that's silly. But for the younger generation, all they know is typing. All they know is the computer and how to use that. And kudos to the kid that was trying to use the ChatGPT. I mean, come on, why not? If the tool is there and it's open, I'll use that. And now, with that being said, I want to shift to what Randolph brought up about, blocking ChatGPT. As a CISO, I am not blocking ChatGPT. And the reason why is because I know for a fact that my employees are going to use it regardless, right? And part of my job is to balance that business operation with the need of security and having the right amount of security, not maximum security, but the right amount of security, but also reduce that security friction so that the business can get on with what they're trying to achieve. That said, I've put in some guidelines and some guardrails, and we've developed a policy. We're going to do some training for the individuals. So if you want to use ChatGPT, that's great. Here's some guidelines. Don't throw any kind of intellectual property into the model. Don't put anything that is financial related or health related for any of our patients or any personal information or identifiable information, because all that becomes part of that model. And I think that goes to the education piece of whenever our users want to use it, explain to them, okay, it's okay to use it, but this is the implications of using that. And so we're developing out this process where if you want to use it, that's great. Here's some training. We're going to roll it out with our annual training so that everybody gets it. And if you want to use it, that's fine. You've already had your training. It's documented, but this is the overall policy, how we're going to proceed. And the reason when I say that I know people are using it today. Whenever I went to my commissioner, who's a CEO equivalency, and I was giving him a briefing about, hey, I'm developing this policy around ChatGPT, generative AI. He reaches over to his laptop and slowly closes the lid, and he says, so should we not be using it? And it was a clear indication if the man at the very top is using it, everybody below him is probably going to be using it as well. So that kind of gave me some urgency. Yeah, we need to put this out there. So Randolph, to your point, I don't believe it needs to be blocked. I think we need to put rules around and guidelines around how to use it in the business space. I think that we're going to find in the personal space, especially our children in the younger generation, like Melanie had said, it's something they're going to grow up with. It's just it's a natural thing. It's there. Why not use it? And I think we're going to learn a lot from our children on how to use it effectively. I sat in a meeting with our state's CISO here a while back, and he brought it. How do we teach our people to use it? I think our people are going to teach us, and more importantly, our children, because again, it's going to be a natural thing for them. They're going to know how to use it long before we could ever take full advantage of it. And it's not dissimilar to when my mom calls me because she can't figure out how to change the channel on her cable box, right? I laugh about it, Mom, it's so easy. But for the older generations, it's harder. And every generation after that, it gets harder. So I think Melanie made an absolutely great point there around the adoption and the use of the technology as we move forward.
You'll be pleased to know also the universities had talked about going back to pen and paper exams that kind of got knocked out because of COVID and everything got moved online, and then sort of like COVID resilience for a couple of years, they haven't returned to pen and paper exams. And following ChatGPT, I think there's going to be a rapid return to big exam rooms and people actually having to learn knowledge, which there's a lot of questions about it, because is that the way the world is going to operate, and our brain set up to really, can they be used better than memorizing lots and lots of knowledge on a short-term basis? And how do we educationally think about these exams? But there are a couple of questions, I think, and even going back to thinking about how do we really where's the question gone? Maybe Angus. I think you've picked me to pose, Angus, and I think you've answered it. No, but I think this is a really interesting question about, I think it was Amy that had it, I think you answered it, about whether our minds will be altered by the extent that we use ChatGPT, and all this question of use. I think what's still the missing picture of this puzzle, and even for your son whose friend wrote the essay, is that people are putting all sorts of essays into, or all sorts of material into ChatGPT. They might be totally rubbish essays, might be complete. And the fact that, sort of even the writing CVs, I think it's in this question of people are putting in their resumes. There's you could argue the people that need ChatGPT to write their resumes are the people who don't have very good jobs, and yet they're going to have to, it's and are their resumes being trained on other people's rubbish resumes? So, Damien and Marcus, that's a question for you. Have you come across any ChatGPT written resumes, and how are they?
No, I think as we discussed last week, Mel, I was saying about I ChatGPT'd a question and got actually some spelling mistakes, which I was really surprised with. And I know we all discussed around the fact that what's bad that goes into ChatGPT will obviously be copied by the system. And I think that was quite critical, really, because I think if people are putting in bad information constantly, and that's bad information in order to affect, what people are doing, then that could have, serious consequences moving forward. I think, and then we've got to be careful from that side and making sure that people are putting the right stuff in if they are, wanting to get the best out of it. But how do you govern what people are putting in? I think that's the key thing as well. But yeah, regarding resumes and job descriptions, I would highly, highly rule against doing anything like that. That's the last thing we want to do. I don't think that's morally or ethically correct as a business. And I know, touching on what Glenn was saying regarding from from a healthcare perspective, people putting in patient data or contracts or anything like that. I just think, wow, it's it's opening up a can of worms, really. I think if you start doing that sort of stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I see Michael has a question out there. I think Angus is typing an answer and is talking about, ways to manage, identify, and control AI output. Is it really next to impossible at this point to stop malevolent entities from creating rogue outcomes? I think that right now, as immature as the models are, and as we continue to mature those things, right? Do we have bad actors out there that's putting misinformation into ChatGPT and other open type of generative AIs? I would say the answer is yes, right? We know we've seen misinformation that is openly available in social media. So why wouldn't they be doing those things? I think that what we need to really look at, and I'm sure this is a problem, a challenge that the companies that run these generative AIs are looking into, is fact checking the data as it comes in. Is it good? Is it true information? And then I think it goes back to, like all things in life, all information that we do receive from multiple sources is have our own critical thinking skills. Look at that. Is it really something that is true? Is it not true? Maybe use multiple sources to double check it to ensure, right? I will, this is one thing that was mentioned at another conference I was at that I think really hits home, right? Whenever you receive something from the generative AI, think of it as a very enthusiastic entry-level person in your company that wants to impress you, wants to give you the right answer. And when they give you the answer, they're 100% confident that it is the right answer, even though maybe it's not. And I think you have to use that caution and approach whenever you're looking at information that is given back to you from the AI and the generative AI most specifically.
Yeah, I think it's like going on to that. I mean, all these things are obviously they're force multipliers. I always say with every capability we have more vulnerability, and with the technology itself, it's always going to amplify and accelerate whatever is human instinct or process to do for good or for bad. And it just depends on them. So there is, in the hands of malevolent actors, it's like anything. A knife can be used to cut butter. It can be used to kill someone. It's the nature of, that's the human instinct less than the technology. I think we're seeing some really interesting things. I don't know if anyone, have you looked at the experiment that was done with poisoning GPT, the poison GPT? So like sort of, you've got worm GPT and Fraud GPT that have sort of been created by malevolent actors. I think like Fraud GPT is on a pay for whatever, I think it's something like $200 per month, and it looks at $1,700 a year. I think if anyone's interested in the yearly subscription to Fraud GPT, it's just out of interest, of course, but is doing the same as sort of how to write spear phishing emails and using that. But I think the poison GPT experiments were really interesting in that they highlighted how you can actually poison the data within the large language models. And I think that's going to be real questions for governance as to where the liability then begins to sit for the ownership, for the checking and the verification of this. And do we, this will be probably the big split between the US and UK. And I know that the China's new regulation sort of started by putting some checks and balances in, into looking at what verifying the data within the large language models as a whole. But it's going to be a question of, is this going to be a duty of care to check the information? Are you going to be, will the companies be liable? What will be that model for ensuring? And we've not sorted that out as far as social media platforms. So I think it's still the $1 million question.
And Melanie, if I may just real quick, you hit on a very, very good subject. I think that could be a whole webinar on its own, right? As we start looking at the responsibility, and these technologies are not just UK based, and they're not just EU based, they're not just US based. These are global technologies. So where does that really lie? And at the very beginning, we talked about the US developing its own regulations and its own laws, and then EU is doing the same thing. The UK is doing the same. I think we're coming to a point from a technology standard that we need to have a global governance over some of this, right? Now, I'm not for global government, don't get me wrong, but a governance around some of these technologies that are true global technologies. Because, you know, what may be within regulation within the United States is not in the EU. So you get this disproportionate population of getting one answer where another one's getting another answer. Is that really where we want to be in a world society? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that truth is truth, regardless where it comes from, you know, or who consumes that. So I think that's a very good question, and that's something that I think is going to be maybe talked about sometime in the future at a larger global stage. But as we
maybe the summit for AI in the mythical summit for AI,
Yeah.
that we're waiting to hear who's going to be invited and who's going to be there. And actually, what are they going to talk about?
Yeah, and you know, it's a good thing, you know, when you start talking about who's invited and then who will not be invited, who's going to be accepted at the table and who will be left out. I think that's important on many things on the geopolitical stage. But is that really something that we should do from a technology standpoint? Exclude countries just based off of their differencing on politics, because this is affecting more than just the politics of a country. We're talking about the spread of knowledge across the world. So that's a big topic. It's happened to come to me as Melanie was talking. I think that might be a subject for another webinar at some other time in the future.
But surely on that basis, Glenn, just touching on that, surely every country will be invited to the table. I know we mentioned this last week, and Mel, you didn't know when this summit will be held, but or at least you're keeping those cards close to your chest. But you know, surely you know every country is going to be invited. But like you said, from a political standpoint, those that don't, will they be sort of pushed into the mire kind of thing?
Well, my personal view, I mean, the original statement on it, which is a statement I fundamentally, you know, disagreed with, was that it was going to be the like-minded countries, and that's always a very sort of arbitrary distinction. There's still, and the big question was, will China be at the table? My personal opinion, very much like Glenn, I think there are conversations you can have in smaller groupings. I think there are conversations that should certainly at the beginning have as many people at the table that need to be. Now that narrative slightly shifted when James Cleverly, the British Foreign Minister, the UK chaired the UN Security Council a couple of weeks ago. They had their first conversation, the first time the UN Security Council ever discussed AI, and in that the talk was slightly wider about this needing the global consensus. We've seen the US rejoin UNESCO, and because that's had a conversation about principles on it. So definitely it's going to require joined up thinking. And from my point of view, I think governments are going to have to move beyond the like-minded and non-like-minded vis-a-vis certain ways that countries operate and get to a like-minded on AI kind of definition, to be able to get people at the table and see at least the baseline principles. Otherwise, at this stage, I think you're going to end up with, like, if you alienate people, you'll get a Maleficent situation. You'll end up with the bad fairy flying over the world and then trying to derail everything you're trying to do with your global governance anyway.
Right, absolutely. I agree with Melanie. So a couple months ago, I visited one of the world largest supercomputing facilities. The director gave us a talk about, you know, the wonderful job that he has done for the society. At the end, he emphasized on the real purpose of those supercomputing facility is for the countries, the nations, or the EU's security and safety. With that as a goal, yes, it's very challenged. It would take some time to get to the point, you know, everybody's on the same table, see each other as a counterpart.
Yeah, I think that. Oh, go ahead, Melanie. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just super quickly on that. And I think there's also a massive question here about making sure that actually no country is left behind and that we don't create a new digital divide between those countries who are already at that stage of their AI ecosystem that are able to really dominate the conversation, and those that haven't quite got there yet. And I think there's a big question making sure that we enable those sort of emerging digital economies to also have a full voice at the table on these issues.
Yeah, Melanie, I was going to comment on the same thing. I'm completely in alignment. So I'm glad you said you definitely could. You said it much better than I could ever say it. We don't want to leave people behind, right? In the global society that we're living in, kind of bring everybody along. I think that answers a lot of questions, a lot of hard things that have happened in the past, and kind of build a better society. And there is a question that came in, and forgive me if I mispronounced the word. Faisal, I was saying he's a physician, and he says really want to leave his job for AI. Eagerly, I am very optimistic, enthusiastic for AI applications in healthcare and medicine. And the questions, are you? So I will say in my organization, because we deal with mental health specifically, we are embracing AI. And what we're looking at, and Angus kind of mentioned this, and he and I talked at RSA on the subject around using AI to generate synthetic data sets, and then using the AI to do analytics on those synthetic data sets for positive outcomes of treatment plans, right? So we know we have mountains of data within our organization, and it takes a lot of time and effort to sift through that to come up with the right kind of treatment plans. So we're looking at using AI to do that for us and present to the physicians, hey, this is a good possible treatment plan for this type of patient. This is the probability of a positive outcome. But also we're going to be using that information and injecting in census data to project out what is our population going to look like in the future, 5, 10, 15 years from now, so that as a government agency, I can now go to the governing bodies that hold the funds and say, look, we have a problem now, but this is how that problem is going to be exacerbated in the 5, 10, 15 years from now. This is what we need today to meet that need of tomorrow. And that's something that we lack today, because just going in and saying that, it's just, oh, you're just crying, you want more money. But now we can use the AI to really look at what we're dealing with and what we would be dealing with in the future, and have some empirical data to show to the lawmakers, this is what we need to be answering that question for our medical needs in the future. So that's how we're approaching it at my agency.
Yeah. Another example is, a company that creates so the digital twin simulation tools for the medical professionals to practice surgery, like bunion surgery. And as the medical professionals using the tool, the data will feed it back. The data becomes the synthetic data, feed it back to its model. And so that reduced the risk of risking patients' life, as well as liability issue, as well as the cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think there's two levels to this question. I think, and something that's really interesting that I heard today. So first of all, I'm a huge believer in the sort of power that, and particularly the Institute, we have a whole stream on health policy that looks at the power of using AI enablement within healthcare, both for predictive medicine, both for what we'll see in looking at virtual hospital wards that will help, with people monitoring remotely where their own health, and what that can give warning bells, and sort of that preventative level of medicine that is going to be really exciting, as well as the solutions that can come from having access to the data to be able to really find, identify whether it's cures or what needs to really be targeted in different situations. I think what's a really interesting question about this AI enablement within this, is something that came up with some of the countries that we work with more remotely, is that where they've been provisioned with things like robotic arms or some of the technologies that are supposed to be used during surgeries, but however, they're quite worried, and this is something that we work about and we sometimes forget about in all this big picture. We're still relying on internet connectivity now, and in some contexts that's not guaranteed. And I think someone put a question on like this about, well, you have to be, what happens if the power goes out? And I think that's a real question with reliance on some of the more semi-autonomous uses of AI-enabled tools in medicine is that, so they, in some places, they won't use these robotic tools because unless there's a doctor present. So where we sort of forecast, can this replace physician? Absolutely not with a lot of people, because what happens if the power goes out or it stops working and you've got a patient open on the table and there's no internet connectivity? So I think there's a lot of questions of Faisal, both stay as a physician and you as AI, and just
Talking of internet connection, we've lost Melanie.
Yeah, I like to comment on it just real quick. So, you know, the approach that we're taking and my stance on it is AI is a tool, and it's a tool to be used by humans, right? It shouldn't be a tool that's just left on its own devices, like what Melanie was saying, especially around healthcare, that we should have some oversight on that, right? So yeah, I would like to kind of shift a little bit. Amy put a great comment in around the use of AI around cybersecurity and in a training. She says that, you know, cybersecurity training has limited effectiveness, right? And how can we use AI to, you know, internally to do things? I know there are a lot of products out there. I've talked to a lot of vendors, and I'm starting to see a shift and focus to using AI within the workspace to provide on demand or when necessary cybersecurity awareness training, right? You click something that's not quite right, automatically it pops up. Are you sure you want to do this? This is why it's risky. And then the human still has to make that decision. So I think that's coming. You know, and to your point, Amy, you're absolutely right. It's only effective to a point. If you look across the board, like in my organization, I'll use an example. Everybody's 100% trained on their cybersecurity awareness training. They understand the risk of clicking on links and phish. We conduct phishing campaigns, and people still click on things, right? We train them and we tell them not to do that. And Gartner did a recent a survey, and I can't remember now, it was maybe 2/3 or something. It's a very large number of individuals. They do things that are risky for the business. And when asked about it, they know it's risky, but they have an objective they have to meet, right? So they do risky things to achieve that objective. And as a security professional, I have to look at that really closely, right? What is it I'm doing that gets in their way, that causes them to do risky things? How can I enable the business, take a step back, use some cyber judgment, and make a decision? Should I or should I not do that based on, you know, a cost benefit analysis? And what is that return on investment? What is that return on click, right? And I think that AI has a part to play in that. I think as we move along and we can put the AI into the environment that kind of has overwatch on what our users are doing and help them, again, I keep saying, help them make those decisions, right? It's not that it's going to make the decisions for them. Again, it's a tool set that we as human beings have to embrace and be able to use for the betterment of ourselves and our businesses. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, Amy, but that's kind of the approach that I'm starting to see. Is something that I like, and I think that we should embrace.
Melanie, you cut out just as you were on about the internet.
I know. I don't know. It was funny because I could hear you and you couldn't hear me, but that was the point. And we still have to accept that interconnectivity, and we still have to accept that also some of these problems. We've still got 2.7 billion people who aren't on the internet. And we're talking about the problems that we're facing with this, and thinking about the weight of that when those people come online as well, and creating the sustainable connectivity, not just for this conversation, but to be able to operate these large language models and to have that universal access to them. And again, it goes back to some of these have and have nots. And we're doing some work on access to compute, but I think this is going to be increasingly relevant and something we forget in this conversation, that we're still at very much the tip of the iceberg of understanding both the capability and then consequently the vulnerabilities that we're going to encounter.
Yeah, I think the take home for me is that AI, you know, humans are still responsible for the majority of stuff that's happening and what goes in there. So we've got to use common sense and take responsibility. But you know, things are developing so fast that I don't think anybody can really control to a great degree how fast AI and technology is moving. Like always, I think we've got to use common sense and, you know, do what is right. I think that's key, really.
Yeah. So, Damien, I'm not sure how much time we have left. I know we may be getting close. I wanted to throw this out there. It just kind of maybe as a thought-provoking idea, because we talk a lot about, you know, AI being friend or foe, which we're talking about here today, but also about, you know, the bad actors that are out there. And we may have talked a bit about this before, but when we start looking at the future, and I say the future, let's go down the road a bit. Quantum computing coming online and using quantum computing to crack our current encryption and how that's going to make things obsolete. And then right now we have this big fear of AI and what that's going to do for us or against us. What happens when those things merge, right? And I think that's something that is very, in my mind, very thought-provoking. I think it's something that we probably should start thinking about now. And I say that because we're seeing such an uptake on the AI subject now, right? It was like this time last year, what's ChatGPT? No one knew. In a matter of a few months, everybody understands it. Everybody knows it. We see the threats that it could pose. We see the benefits it could give us. We know that quantum computing is there, right? We know it's going to become a large part of what we do from a nation state standard, but eventually it will become as a service. And what does that mean? That means it's going to become open to use by cyber villains, right? And because cyber villains will have the money, because they're making a lot of money on extortion now, they'll have access to that. So what happens when we overlay AI on top of that? I think that is the next big rock that we really need to start thinking about now, because I think it'll come to us quicker than what we realize.
Food for thought. Next webinar.
No, but echoing Glenn on that, it's like we always talk about policy, and policy just like I always describe policy a bit like in these questions of like, this is like Roadrunner, and we're like Wile E. Coyote, and we drop these big like legislations or governance bombs, like, and Roadrunner's already gone. And if it's going to take us 5 years, 10 years to get the kind of policy thinking in place for something that's going to happen in 10 years time, we're already way behind. So we need to, as Glenn said, we need to really be looking forward at where these things converge and what the sort of, you know, the whirlpool's going to be at that convergence point.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take government as an example. You know, government still using AES-256 encryptions, and those were that's just strong enough for to deter cyber threats or agents. Like Glenn mentioned, that if we as we flock to quantum cryptography, how do we bring everybody, the societies, everybody to ready for the quantum cryptography from AES-256?
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, everybody. Thank you.